episode of Conscious Being, Conscious not Conscious Leaving. I'm going to start over. Welcome to another episode of Conscious Being, Conscious Living, the exploration with your host, Eva Pandit. I'm an Access Consciousness certified facilitator, among a bunch of other credentials. But today we are talking about relationships, judgments, and projections. And the reason I took on to this topic is A, because obviously something came up in my life around this topic, and B, also relationships as we know of them, or as we call them, and judgments and projections that go with them kind of are such an integral part of life and living, and the way we approach them, the way we be with them determines the space that we have in our world, which we can then use to either create the life and the living and the kind of contribution we want to have in the world, more of that, or it can keep us from showing up as the person we want to show up as. So to begin with, I want to explore the three terms. What is relationship? What's judgment? What are projections? And have some super interesting and very out of the norm kind of ways of looking at it, all from all the different things that I've learned from Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness. And I'll try to put it together here in a way that you can have access to that very different and very useful information too. So relationship, what is a relationship? A lot of times we think a relationship is what we have with other people, and kind of, but literally speaking, relationship means distance between two objects. Makes sense, right? Like in science, they teach you what's the relationship of stimulus A with stimulus B, and we're just basically, the fact that we're calling it a relationship, the assumption is there are two things that are separate from each other, and in the relationship, we're determining what is the distance between two objects. So how that translates to in relationships, and also kind of starts to bleed in with the whole thing about judgments and projections, is that when it comes to relationships in your life, with people, in your personal life, in your work situations, or anywhere actually, what happens is if you're, and this is by the way, most you can find how this works most directly in like a partner kind of a relationship, in like romantic relationship. And so what happens is that when someone is operating from the point of view of relationships, and I am going to come back to you and show you what else is possible, but first we'll just explore what is. So when in order for you to determine your relationship with somebody, do you have to judge more or less? Like, is the distance, relationship being the distance between two objects or two people in this case, right? So relationship is the space. What is the space between us? Do we have, am I getting enough space? Or, is the person moving too far from me? How can I keep the person close to me? Who is close to me? Who is it that I do not want to be close to me? And that is the energy behind the word relationship. And I'll be exploring more on that, but for a bit, we'll jump on to judgments. Now, we tend to think, like, a common understanding of the word judgment is it's something bad, or that it is something that, is wrong. But I want you to consider here for a second that not just bad is a judgment, but so is good. Not just wrong is a judgment, but so is right. So all these ways in which we do polarity, again, right? In order to even create a relationship like we just talked about, relationship is the distance between two objects. In order to create polarity also, you have to have two objects that are opposite to each other. So good or bad is a judgment, right or wrong is a judgment, and positive and negative is a judgment. And that's the part that we miss a lot of times, because it's very obvious in the way we're taught, and in the way majority of the world works, that We're looking at escaping the negative or changing the negative. But anytime someone has a positive judgment of you, yes, positive judgment of you, that is also a judgment. And the reason it becomes important for you to know as a conscious creator, as someone who consciously wants to engage with and create your life, is because these insidious right judgments and these insidious positive judgments are what stick us the most because we don't even know they exist. And so how they become a judgment is because once you've decided that this is right, can you receive anything that's outside of that? Once you've decided that the negative is wrong and positive is right, and this is the positive thing to do, what if there's something else that's possible that's far greater than any of that? So that's the second word, judgment. The third one, which is projections. Now, the thing to know about projections is that projections and expectations, when you have that of yourself or of anybody else, the only place it leads you to is separation, judgment, and rejection of you. So anytime you have an expectation of yourself, let's say, for example, to do something or to meet a quote unquote standard, and so that right there gives you a benchmark to judge yourself against, so instead of, and this kind of really links in with, let me actually give you a little bit of peek around what else is possible, because, we talk about these different judgments and polarity and all of that, and relationship, which is the space or the distance between two people. But what's truly possible and what is available and what truly exists in the nature is oneness and communion. And I'm fully aware that the majority, like in our current times, we have made logic and intelligence so superior to wisdom and being, which is the natural gift of nature and existence, that we oftentimes, go to our heads and go to the logic to look into the things. And because we've accumulated enough proof and validation of what we can create with our logic and using analysis and things like that, that we've really put things like elements, like they're not even things, they're literally elements that exist in the nature, elements like being and perceiving and receiving, the elements from which nature creates, everything in the nature creates. Sorry, I just dropped a little something, a little this thing. So we kind of have separated ourselves from it and negated it and made it the less valuable product than our logics and the analysis and the figuring out and all of that. And yes, there is a gift to that, because, consciousness includes everything and judges nothing, and it wants to give you total choice. So that intelligence is a gift, but it's not everything. Like, have you looked around and seen, we look around and we look at the glorious things the mankind has created, and because from those creations and those intelligence, we somewhere started separating from our own inner knowing, that part of us that makes us nature. Look at how much harm we're causing to the planet. Our foresight has become so limited. We're only looking like now, in a few years, maybe 100 years into the future. But how about like 500 years into the future? And like 1,000 years into the future, or 10,000 years into the future, is the way the intelligence is creating sustainable. And even when I say that, it's not that, will the planet be sustainable? The planet is always going to sustain itself. Will it be sustainable for us? Will we be able to sustain ourselves and our future generation, and sustain life as we know it, this beautiful, enriching, resource of planet Earth? Is that something that we can sustain if we keep separating our intelligence from our wisdom? And a bit of a sidetrack, but it's also related, because when we're talking about relationships, judgments, and projections, what we end up doing is we create from that space of intelligence and judgment, while separating ourselves from that space of communion and oneness that's truly possible and available for us. So that's the possibility that I'm inviting you to as we're going on in the conversation. And the reason this thing came up was a few days ago, one of my good friends reached out to me and said some stuff that was basically a bunch of judgments, a bunch of insidious judgments in a lot of ways, and not even the positive insidious judgments, but basically she had some points of views around the choices I made, and there was very little curiosity or willingness to know. And I get it. I do all of that. I've done all of that a lot of times in my life, and I don't do that anymore, but that is the choice that she made. And she quoted a bunch of stuff for me around what relationships and how relationships are valuable and the most important thing in life. And that's another part of the whole piece, because, you know, when we have that kind of point of, actually, it's all of this starts with me taking a step back and start looking at what does really count for me. What makes my life worth living? What is the kind of world I wish to create? What is the kind of life I wish to create? And what will I have to institute and do in order to actualize all that? So it all actually begins not from this conversation around relationships. And the reason this conversation around relationships, judgments, and projections become all the more important is because these are the kind of elements and things that we use to separate and cut ourselves from that space, one step or a few steps or maybe 1,000 miles back from that energy, that space where we, the being, exists, and we, the being, has a desire to contribute and to create in our life and in the world. And so this entire conversation for me, when my friend came up and told me, and I totally get it, I totally honor that, you know, that's the way she looks at life, and I get it. And there was a bunch of judgment around what relationships are, how I am wrong. She didn't directly say it, but that was the underlying energy around all of that, and how I'm making her wrong, or, you know, and that's the thing that occurs when we look at the quote unquote relationships, as in the distance between two people. And then there's nothing else that we can do but judge how close that distance is, or how further away is that relationship going. But what else is possible? What if there was another way of being in the world, wherein we're not operating from that judgment of relationship, or how close, how far you are from someone, but a possibility of being, and a possibility of being in communion and oneness with the person, in inclusion of everybody and all their choices. And I totally get that this is not a passive conversation. In order for you to even be willing to go on to this journey, embark this journey of conscious being, conscious living, conscious creations in the world, you've got to be like aggressively present with yourself, because it's not about doing it right. Remember, right is a judgment, and you will never do it right, because right is a judgment. You will fuck up sometimes. But it's all about being willing to be with life and to live it and to choose it and to not conclude anything as anything else, and to be willing to expand into the possibilities that you're aware of, and to invite people to that possibility, and not contract yourself based on other people's judgments, rejections, projections, expectations, and, you know, definitions and conclusions of how it should be. And if you're anything like me and the kind of culture and even microculture that I grew up in, That is what is considered valuable in this reality, because they teach you to maintain relationships. They teach you to make sure you're close enough and holding people that are your quote unquote family or anything that matches that energy close enough. But imagine how much judgment it takes to even hold on to that point of view. And so when my friend reached out to me, thanks to me practicing a lot of these tools of consciousness for a long time and fucking it up several times over, I knew that I did not want to react immediately and just, first of all, be the energy that I am now. Because here's the thing, it's not just the friend who was projecting and expecting and shooting judgments. Immediately after that, my autopilot response was to fight back and to defend myself and to tell her how much she's judging me. And thank God that with all the practice of consciousness, those moments and those impulses have become so less for me that I didn't actually end up doing it. I was with it, kind of like how they teach you in meditation, wherein you're like being and your thoughts are coming and going and you're observing them. You're not like getting floated away by them, kind of like that, but not just in a space of meditation with your eyes closed, but when you're living it. So I caught myself in the moment of presence to literally look at what's going on here. And is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to be? Because guess what? Guess who's judging now? And guess who's expecting that someone else should not be like this now? And in those microseconds, it's been a journey, you guys. There have been times where I've really indulged in that. But this particular time, very, very quickly, I knew that this is not the energy I want in my life. B, that stuff is coming up. And see that I do not want to show up as I used to before. And so how do I want to show up here? So I remember I was cooking, I went on, I finished my entire cooking. And while cooking, I was really engaging with the energy, creating space for myself, looking at who do I want to be and what energy do I want to be here. And I ended up sending a bunch of replies, da-da-da-da-da. At the end of it, there was this thing in her world, I just so knew she totally misunderstood what I said and how I said it. And in her world, she was finally right and she'd made me wrong enough. And I had not defended that rightness or wrongness. And so that kind of the energy dissipated. But here's the thing I want to invite you to look at, my friend. We're going to take a step back and look at what judgments are. And are they ever even real? Are judgments ever real? Or is it something that we buy into and then we resist and react to, and we've bought into it and we've paid for it and we've been sold? Judgment is not real. It never is. But we make judgment real for us by, of course, when we align and agree with it, when we say, yeah, you're right, and we're really bought into it, but also when we resist to it. So if I go how dare you say that? That's not true. You're judging, I'm not judging, or whatever, that kind of resistance and reaction, it may not be something that is said, or it might be something totally covert. But even when you're resisting and reacting, guess what you're resisting and reacting to? A judgment that you've bought as real. But is it? Is judgment ever real, my friend? And so I really had to force myself. And that's where, this entire thing about the rightness being judgments, because it's a spherical conversation. It's not a linear conversation. It's a spherical 5-dimensional conversation. And yeah, so when there was something very important I was going to say here that just flew out of my head, right out the window. Hopefully not out the window. It'll come back. But Yeah, so awareness is like your awareness is always spherical like that, and life is spherical and it's not linear. And so when this person, gosh, shit, I so want to say what I wanted to say, but I think I've just got to move on from this point and it'll come back when it'll come back. That's so funny. What was I talking about? Total ADD happening here, you guys. But we're gonna roll with it because judge nothing, include everything. That's the only rule of consciousness. It's not even a rule. Like, even if you don't follow it, consciousness would still include you. So, projection, relationships, judgments, and projections. It's, oh my God, it's coming back. I was going to talk something about rightness being a judgment. Yes. What I was going to say is that, so when my friend, I had to give up the need to be right in order to create what I wanted to create, which is a space. I didn't, imagine two people fighting. One person shoots back, shoots their point of view, which is, if it's a fight, chances are it's an opposing point of view to the other person's point of view. The other person's shouting back, this person's shouting back. And so a lot of times it's not just shouting back in words and in screams, it's shouting back in energy and resisting and reacting, creating more separation, maintaining, by the way, the relationship, because it's a distance between two people and two objects. So, but one person, and in your life, that person's got to be you. I'm sorry, there's no other way. There's nobody else living your life with you. But one person has to let go of the judgment and the need to be right. And really, it's a relentless ask and demand of yourself to let that go and zoom out and really look at, am I interested in being right here, or am I interested in being free? Because in that moment, there was a huge amount of impulse for me to be right and to, like, I'm not gonna like what I'm saying, but I'm not gonna not say it, because the truth of that moment was that the energy that was coming up for me was, I'll show you your space in this conversation and how wrong you are, was one of the energies that's coming up. And the conscious choice is to not follow that and instead step back and look into, what is this choice going to create? Like, if I go on trying to be right because I so know I'm right and she so knows that she's right, and I can also see why she's feeling that and why she's choosing that point of view. Like, if that's the point of view, of course you'll feel like there's a bunch of everything going on right there. But the choice was to be willing to not be right and give up the argument and receive what's going on, which is, I know is the other person's judgments. That person may not even know it's their judgments because they're so close to it. Kind of like, fish swimming in the water does not really know there's water. For it's like, where is water? That's kind of who we become when we've really bought into judgments as real. And so in my life, I am the source of what I wish to create and what are the energies I wish to have in my life, I desire to have in my life and in my future. And the energies that I'm choosing right now are what are creating my future, are what are creating this space from which I create my damn future. And so I had to give up the need to be right and just stop making that judgment real. Stop making it about me or stop making it about her. Just acknowledge that it's not even real. And that's probably the toughest thing to do when it comes to relationships, judgments, and projections, to just acknowledge that none of that is real and that all of that is what we use to separate from, judge, and reject ourselves. Because guess what? Had I reacted, would it have created more judgment or less? And not just in her world, but also in my world, because then I would have judged me for if my reaction was right or wrong. So it's like an insidious trap, you guys. Conscious being, conscious living is an invitation to move, to out-create that, to create something different, It's not even about let's change this. No, it's like if you're sitting in a chair and the leg is broken, would you rather fix that chair, or would you just get up and sit on a different chair? Or maybe even sit on a couch. Just saying. So it's kind of like that you have to sometimes choose different. And in order to do that, you've got to be willing to be wrong. And you've got to let go of your need to be right. And that's a lot of what this relationship judgments and projections conversation is about. Because guess what else is possible when you're not buying judgment as real? You get to live from a different space of communion, of oneness, of non-separation. And it's literally a space, a very expansive space. And when you're in that space, you get the space. I'm saying space so many times here, but you actually get the space to create your life and your future and your business and your living in a way that you want to. Because a lot of times we also within our life create these separations. So if something's, we separate our relationships from our professional life and things like that, none of that is real. We have one life and everything is the creation of it. And there is no separation. And so if you're buying into relationships and judgments and projections and the drama and the trauma that comes with that as real, that energy overflows in every other area of our life and every other moment of your day. So the invitation I have for you today is to give yourself the gift of being, of fucking up, and then choosing different towards what you want to create, of not judging yourself, of not judging yourself for judging yourself, of giving yourself more space than you require and more kindness than you've been willing. And it's from that space of kindness and that space of expansion that you truly get to create. So, well, my friend, I hope this was a contribution. This conversation is a contribution for you. If you know this conversation will contribute to somebody else too, please share it with them. Will you please invite your friend over to listen to this, or just share these different conversations with people in your life? I'll be so very grateful. I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, happy creating and don't buy judgment is real. Bye.